Hey guys, so it's been a little while of doing the Professor Raine fan fictions that I've gotten. So we were in the middle of reading Rufus Raine and the American Witch, and I think we're on chapter 3, or maybe I read 2 and 3, so chapter 4. Anyway, I'm gonna continue reading it, and we'll read. I don't want to make this video too long, so anyway, I don't know. We'll read till I decide it's a long enough video. So anyway. If you missed the last few episodes, basically the main character in here, unfortunately I forgot her name, was basically had a night of passion with Raine, but didn't know he was a professor. Anyway, and now she's at school and met him, so scary, right? I know, scary. She was like of age though, so it's not that weird. But anyway. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's all I remember. So I woke up for the first few seconds feeling. Okay, hold on. Sorry. Oh, well, it wasn't at the beginning. Okay. I woke up for the first few seconds. Everything felt like it was okay. But then I remembered everything. I wanted to stay in bed all day. But I wanted to make a good first impression with the teachers, so I got out of bed and prepared for the day. As I sat down to eat breakfast, I looked at my schedule. I had 2 hours of charms with Professor Darling, followed by Care of Magical Creatures with Oak, and 2 hours of Defense Against the Dark Arts with Professor Pine, and then Transfiguration with Professor Raine. At least it's at the end of the day, so I'll have time to mentally prepare myself, I thought. Professor Raine wasn't at the teacher's table for breakfast, which made me feel a little bit anxious. As I was looking through my schedule, Violet sat in front of me. Violet, this is the Slytherin's table. You're not supposed to be here, I whispered to her. I didn't want her to get in trouble. The professors don't mind. Don't worry, she assured me. She grabbed herself a plate full of vegetables. Quidditch tryouts for Slytherins are today at 4 p.m. Are you going to try out? She said as she poured herself a glass of water. I forgot that I had mentioned to her earlier on the train that I liked Quidditch, and I was actually pretty good at being a chaser. Yeah, I think, don't I need my parents' permission to try out for the team? I asked, and she shook her head no, since her mouth was full of veggies. Really? Quidditch can be really dangerous, especially during winter. You really don't need a permission slip? I questioned her, but there was no way you could play Quidditch without a permission slip at Ilvermorny. She thought for a second before replying, well, you need to ask your head of house, in your case Professor Pine, but I'm sure he'll allow you to try out. I had a lesson with Pine that day, so I decided I'd ask him after class. What lesson do you have now? She asked. I have 2 hours of charms, I said in an unenthusiastic tone. Charms isn't my strongest subject, but when Violet said she has the same, it cheered me up. Maybe she can help me, I thought to myself. After breakfast, we headed to the Charms classroom together. We were one of the first ones there, and Professor Darling was sitting at her desk reading a book. We sat down together and waited for everyone else to show up. Professor Darling started the lesson with a quick introduction, and then we began to learn about the water-making spell. I couldn't do it at first, but Violet helped me improve my wand motion, and I managed to fill a goblet with water. The lesson wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and next I had Care of Magical Creatures. Unfortunately, Violet wasn't with me in this class. Professor Oak was a friendly man and a great teacher. Care of Magical Creatures was an optional class for 6 years, and I took it because my mother was a trained professional in unicorn care. The class was a bit boring since we didn't get to interact with any creatures yet, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I was having a good day. The teachers were nice since the subjects were interesting. Next was Defense Against the Dark Arts. As I was headed to the classroom, the staircase started moving. I held on tight to the railing and got off the staircase as soon as it stopped moving. I couldn't understand where I was. I tried another staircase, but to no avail. I got lost. I wandered about the castle for what seemed like an eternity until I found the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. I slowly opened the door, and it squeaked, getting the attention of all the students as they turned to face me. This was the first time I had ever been late to a class. Ever. Professor Pine turned from the board and looked and looked at me. "Monroe, you're late. Have a seat," he said sternly. I rushed to the nearest seat and took my books out. I managed to catch up a bit, but embarrassment didn't leave me. Today's lesson was about Dementors and how to get away from them. I learned the Patronus charm in theory, and the professor said that the next lesson we will cast the Patronus charm. Back at Ilvermorny, the Patronus charm was learnt at the 4th year, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't cast a Patronus. It was the only charm I couldn't cast. I was hoping that this time would be different. After class ended and all the students left, I approached Professor Pine's desk where he sat. I was nervous to talk to him because I was late to class and he might not allow me to join Quidditch because of it. "Excuse me, Professor," I said to get his attention. He looked up from his book he was reading, raised an eyebrow at me, So, I'd like to try out for Quidditch, and I heard that I need permission from my head of house. I trailed off. He opened a drawer, took out a permission slip, signed it, and handed it to me. Before I could thank him, he said, "Detention, 8 p.m. I suggest you don't be late again." I nodded and thanked him for the permission slip and exited the room. Since it was lunchtime, I decided to skip, since I wasn't feeling hungry. I went to the Slytherin common room and studied the Patronus charm. I had forgotten that I had Transfiguration with Professor Raine. I managed to get there on time without getting lost, and class began with Professor Raine stating all the rules. His tone was stern, and it was obvious he wasn't a very friendly teacher. Oh, just a second, I have to respond to that. Okay, hopefully no more distractions. After we began, so Professor Raine wasn't very friendly. Awesome. After that, we began to study a bird conjuring charm. Luckily, I learned it before and was able to cast it easily. Professor Raine didn't seem impressed by any of the students who managed to cast the charm. He was so different than the Raine I had met during the summer. His kind and loving nature was replaced by a cold and strict tone. I avoided eye contact the entire lesson, and I tried to pretend I had never met him before in my life. When the lesson ended, he dismissed us students, and I quickly walked to the door, but his voice stopped me. "Monroe, you stay." That was a terrible Professor Raine voice. He said, I wanted to run the hell out of there, but I didn't want to get double detention, so I stayed. I stood in front of his desk in the now empty classroom and waited for him to speak. I didn't know what he'd say, but he did certainly surprise me. He pointed his wand at me and said, "Obliviate." Almost instantly, I took my wand out and protected myself from the memory charm. With my wand still held out, I pointed at him and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" His wand was still pointed at me and said, "I think you know." I hadn't expected him to try to erase my memory. I thought he might swear me to secrecy, but attempting to obliviate me, it infuriated me. "Listen, I won't tell anyone anything. You don't need to do that. Don't you think I have the right to have my memories? I don't give a shit about what happened. I just want to finish my education and get the hell out of England," I told him. He seemed taken aback by my tone. I don't think a student had ever yelled at him. "Fine," he answered. After a short pause, he asked, "Why didn't you mention that you're a witch?" I thought you were a nomad." Oh, no, that was her. I'm sorry. "I thought you were a nomad," I responded. "We call them muggles here, and I thought you were a muggle, since you dress like one. Didn't you see my house? It was filled with magical artifacts. You're not very observant." He replied, mocking me. Oh, it's so Professor Raine. Oh, man. I narrowed my eyes at him. "With all due respect, Professor, I wasn't looking at the interior design of your house," I said in a sarcastic tone. He looked as if he was going to respond, and then he just sighed. "You're dismissed, Monroe, and next time you yell, you'll be in detention," he said while avoiding my eyes. I picked up my book bag and left. It was almost time for Quidditch tryouts, and I went to the common room to get ready. And that is the end of chapter 4. So I think we'll stop there, and I'll record another chapter.